A starving black nurse saved a cowboy in the snow. Then he made her his whole world. "Please don't die on me," the trembling woman whispered, pressing her frozen hands against the giant cowboy's bleeding wound as the blizzard raged around them. Chicago's medical elite had cast her out with lies and scandal, convinced she would vanish into obscurity like all the others before her. The broken nurse seemed destined to freeze to death in these mountains, another victim of a world that refused to see her worth. But the wounded rancher, bleeding in her arms, held secrets that would change everything. His enemies were the same powerful men who destroyed her life. Their conspiracy ran deeper than either realized, with stolen fortunes and murder covering a trail that led straight back to the lies that ruined her. Can two outcasts survive long enough to expose the truth that could either redeem them both or get them killed? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Clara Bennett's steady hands moved across the patient's fevered brow as she checked his temperature for the third time that morning. Presbyterian Hospital's cholera ward buzzed with activity, but the other nurses gave her a wide berth. They always did. Dr. Morrison glanced up from his clipboard with barely concealed irritation. "Miss Bennett, the Whitmore boy needs his medication." Clara nodded and prepared the dose with practiced precision. David Whitmore lay pale and trembling in the private room his family's money had secured. The young socialite had arrived 3 days ago, nearly dead from the epidemic sweeping through Chicago's poorest districts. She administered the medicine and checked his pulse. Strong and steady now. Her innovative treatment combining willow bark extract with careful hydration had saved his life when traditional methods failed. David's eyes fluttered open. "You're the one who's been caring for me. Rest now, Mr. Whitmore. You're recovering well." His gaze lingered on her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She adjusted his blankets and stepped back toward the door. "Wait." His voice was stronger now. "I want to thank you properly when I'm well." Clara's expression remained professional. "No thanks necessary, sir. It's my job." Over the following weeks, David's recovery progressed remarkably. But so did his attention toward Clara. He requested her specifically for every treatment. He asked personal questions about her training, her family, her life outside the hospital. Clara maintained strict professional boundaries. She had worked too hard to earn respect in Chicago's medical community to risk her reputation on a patient's misguided gratitude. The day of David's discharge, he cornered her in the supply room. "Have dinner with me, Clara. You saved my life. Let me show you how grateful I am." "That's not appropriate, Mr. Whitmore. I'm glad you've recovered. But our professional relationship ends here." His charming smile faltered. "Professional relationship? Clara? What we have is special. You can't deny the connection between us." "There is no connection. You were my patient, nothing more." David's face hardened. "You're making a mistake." Clara stepped past him toward the door. The only mistake would be crossing professional boundaries. "Good day, Mr. Whitmore." Within a week, whispers began following Clara through the hospital corridors. Nurses who had barely acknowledged her existence now stared openly. Dr. Morrison called her into his office on a gray October morning. "Serious allegations have been made against you, Miss Bennett." Clara's stomach dropped. "What kind of allegations?" "David Whitmore claims you behaved inappropriately during his treatment, that you took advantage of his vulnerable state for personal gain." "That's completely false. I maintained strict professional conduct at all times." Dr. Morrison's expression remained cold. "The Whitmore family has provided witness statements from other patients. They paint a disturbing picture of manipulation and improper conduct. Those witnesses are lying. This is retaliation because I refused his advances. The medical board will investigate these claims thoroughly. Until then, you're suspended without pay." The investigation proved to be a sham. Witnesses appeared with detailed stories of Clara's supposed misconduct. Their testimonies were polished, consistent, and completely fabricated. But the Whitmore name carried weight that Clara's word never could. The board's decision arrived on a bitter November morning. Her medical license was permanently revoked for moral turpitude and unprofessional conduct. Clara's landlord delivered the eviction notice that same afternoon. Word had spread through her neighborhood. No one wanted to associate with a woman of questionable character. Her savings disappeared quickly. The few friends she had made in Chicago's small community of educated colored professionals distanced themselves. Association with scandal could destroy their own carefully built reputations. By December, Clara had sold everything of value she owned. The city that had once seemed full of possibility now felt like a trap closing around her. Everywhere she went, people whispered and stared. She remembered her uncle's letters from Colorado Territory. He had found some success in the mining claims out there before his sudden death that spring. Perhaps his old cabin could provide temporary shelter while she figured out what to do next. The train ticket to Denver cost almost her last dollar. Clara packed her few remaining possessions and her uncle's medical instruments into a single bag. Whatever awaited her in Colorado had to be better than the slow suffocation of remaining in Chicago. The journey west took 3 days. Clara spent the time staring out the window at the endless prairie, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She had no money, no prospects. And winter was coming to the mountains. The stagecoach from Denver to the mining territory cost her final coins. The driver looked skeptical when she gave him the location of her uncle's claim. "That's pretty remote, miss. You sure you want to go out there alone? Weather's turning bad." Clara nodded. She had nowhere else to go. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Snow had already begun to fall, dusting the sagging roof and broken windows. Clara pushed open the door and stepped inside. The single room was freezing and nearly empty. Her uncle's few possessions lay scattered as if someone had searched through them hastily. Dark stains on the wooden floor made her stomach clench with sudden understanding. Uncle Samuel's death hadn't been natural. Someone had killed him. Clara sank onto the crude wooden chair and stared at the cold fireplace. She had fled to Colorado seeking refuge, but she might have walked into something far more dangerous than Chicago's social exile. Outside, the wind began to howl through the mountain pines. The blizzard was coming, and Clara Bennett had never felt more alone. The blizzard had raged for 2 days. Clara huddled near the dying embers of her meager fire, her medical bag clutched against her chest. The last of her dried provisions sat untouched on the table. She had lost the will to eat. Snow piled against the cabin windows, sealing her inside nature's tomb. The wind shrieked through gaps in the walls like voices of the damned. Clara stared at the dark stains on the floor where her uncle had died. Perhaps joining him would be easier than facing another day of this frozen hell. Gunshots cracked through the storm. 3 quick bursts, then silence. Clara's head snapped up. The shots had come from nearby, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. She pressed her face against the frosted window, but saw only swirling white. More gunshots. Closer this time. Someone was out there in the blizzard. Someone in trouble. Clara grabbed her medical bag and pushed against the cabin door. Wind and snow fought her efforts, but she managed to squeeze outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. "Hello?" Her voice disappeared into the storm. "Where are you?" A dark shape lay crumpled near the tree line. Clara stumbled through knee-deep snow toward the motionless figure. Her feet went numb within seconds, but she pressed forward. The man was massive, easily 6 feet tall with broad shoulders. Blood stained the snow around his body in bright red patches. A bullet wound in his left side leaked steadily through his torn shirt. Clara knelt beside him and pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was weak but steady. Frostbite had already begun to color his exposed skin blue, but he was still breathing. "Can you hear me?" She shook his shoulder gently. No response. The man's lips were turning purple from the cold. Clara had faced this exact scenario dozens of times in Chicago's charity wards. Gunshot wounds, blood loss, shock. Her training took over, pushing aside despair and self-pity. She grabbed the man's arms and began dragging him toward the cabin. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, but determination gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Every few feet she had to stop and adjust her grip, but she never let go. The cabin door had blown shut in the wind. Clara kicked it open and hauled the unconscious man inside. She rolled him onto her uncle's old cot and immediately began cutting away his bloody shirt. The bullet had entered just below his ribs on the left side. Clara probed the wound gently with her fingers. The bullet was still inside, lodged against what felt like a rib bone. Blood flow suggested the projectile had missed major organs, but infection would kill him if she didn't act fast. She built up the fire and set water to boil in her uncle's old pot. Her medical instruments lay clean and ready in her bag. The bottle of whiskey she had found in the cabin would serve as antiseptic and anesthetic. Clara poured whiskey directly into the wound. The man's body jerked, and his eyes flew open with a sharp intake of breath. "Stay still," she commanded. "You've been shot. I need to remove the bullet." The man's eyes focused on her face. Despite his pain, intelligence flickered in his gaze. "Who are you?" "Clara Bennett. I'm a nurse." "A nurse?" His voice carried surprise and something that might have been relief. "Out here in the middle of nowhere." Clara heated her forceps in the fire. "This is going to hurt badly. Drink this." She held the whiskey bottle to his lips. He took several long swallows, then lay back against the pillow. "Do what you have to do." Clara had performed this exact procedure countless times in Chicago's emergency wards. Gunshot wounds were common in the city's poorest neighborhoods. Her steady hands had saved dozens of men who arrived bleeding and dying on hospital doorsteps. She probed into the wound with her forceps. The man gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. Clara felt the metal tip of her instrument contact the bullet. Carefully, she worked the forceps around the lead slug. Got it. She pulled the bullet free and dropped it into a metal pan with a soft clink. The man exhaled shakily. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Presbyterian Hospital in Chicago." Clara cleaned the wound thoroughly and began stitching it closed. "I worked there for 3 years before—" She stopped herself. "Before what?" Clara focused on her sutures. "Before I came here." The man studied her face as she worked. "Clara Bennett. That name sounds familiar." Clara's hands stilled. "You've heard of me?" "Read about you in the newspapers. Some scandal in Chicago involving a wealthy family." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. Even here, in the middle of nowhere, her shame had followed her. "The papers made you sound like some kind of predator," the man continued. "But predators don't risk their lives to save strangers in blizzards." Clara finished the last stitch and bandaged the wound. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you just saved my life with skill most doctors would envy." He tried to sit up and winced. "Name's Ethan Talbot. I own the largest cattle ranch in this territory." "What were you doing out in a blizzard with bullet holes in you?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Running from men who want me dead. Same men who've been spreading your story in every newspaper from Denver to Santa Fe." Clara's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Samuel Morrison. He's the one behind your troubles in Chicago. He's also the one who had your uncle killed." The cabin seemed to spin around Clara. "That's impossible. I never heard of Samuel Morrison." "He's David Whitmore's business partner. They've been working together to steal mining claims throughout Colorado territory. Your uncle refused to sell, so they killed him. When they realized he had a niece who might inherit his claims, Morrison made sure your reputation was destroyed before you could cause them problems." Clara sank into the wooden chair. Everything made horrible sense now. The systematic destruction of her life hadn't been random revenge. It had been calculated elimination of a potential threat. "Morrison's men have been hunting me for weeks," Ethan continued. "I have evidence of their land theft operation. Evidence that could clear your name and put them both in prison." Clara looked at this wounded stranger who had stumbled into her life carrying the key to her redemption. "Why should I trust you?" "Because we're fighting the same enemy. And because you just proved you're exactly the opposite of what those newspapers claimed." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Help me stop Morrison, and I'll help you get your life back." Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury. But for the first time in months, Clara Bennett felt a spark of hope warming her frozen heart. Ethan spent 3 days recovering in the cabin while the blizzard raged outside. Clara changed his bandages twice daily, monitoring for signs of infection. Her steady care and expert treatment accelerated his healing beyond what most frontier doctors could achieve. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke. Ethan sat up without wincing for the first time since the shooting. "Tell me about Morrison's operation," Clara said, checking his wound. The stitches were holding perfectly. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather journal wrapped in oiled cloth. "I've been documenting his crimes for months. Morrison has stolen over 30,000 acres of land using fake Indian raids as cover." Clara examined the journal's contents, detailed records of property seizures, dates of supposed attacks, names of murdered ranchers. The documentation was thorough and damning. "He stages the raids using his own hired men," Ethan continued, "then claims the land is too dangerous for settlement and buys it from the territorial government for nothing. What about the witnesses to these attacks? Dead or paid off, Morrison's very thorough about eliminating loose ends." Clara turned pages filled with evidence. "This proves systematic fraud. But how does it connect to what happened to me in Chicago?" Ethan pointed to an entry dated 6 months earlier. "Your uncle Samuel Bennett refused Morrison's offer to buy his mining claims. The land contains silver deposits worth more than Morrison's entire cattle operation." Clara's finger traced her uncle's name in Ethan's careful handwriting. "So, Morrison had him killed. Poisoned with arsenic. Made it look like natural causes." Ethan's expression hardened. Morrison knew Samuel had a niece in Chicago. "He couldn't risk you inheriting the claims and investigating your uncle's death. That's why David Whitmore destroyed my reputation. Morrison and the Whitmore family have been business partners for years. David was already stealing from his family's charity funds to finance Morrison's land purchases. Destroying you was just another business transaction." Clara closed the journal and stared at the cabin's rough walls. Her uncle's blood still stained the floorboards where Morrison's men had murdered him. The systematic destruction of her life suddenly made perfect sense. "Morrison's operation extends beyond land theft," Ethan continued. "He's been selling weapons to both sides of territorial conflicts, creating violence so he can profit from the aftermath. You have proof of this?" Ethan nodded grimly. "Hidden in my ranch's safe. Purchase records, shipping manifests, correspondence with arms dealers in Kansas City." Clara began pacing the small cabin. Her medical training had taught her to analyze evidence systematically. "We need more than documents. We need witnesses who can testify to Morrison's methods. Most of the witnesses are dead. Morrison doesn't leave people alive to contradict his stories. Then we need to catch him in the act." Clara's mind was working now, applying the same methodical approach she used for complex medical diagnoses. "When is his next planned operation?" Ethan consulted his journal. "He's targeting the Santos Ranch next week. Maria Santos owns prime grazing land adjacent to the railroad right-of-way. Her property is worth a fortune if the rail line goes through. What's his usual pattern? Fake Indian raid at dawn. Kill the ranchers, steal their cattle, burn the buildings. Then Morrison arrives with territorial officials to assess the damage and claim the land is too dangerous for settlement." Clara sat back down and began formulating a plan. What if the raid failed? What if there were credible witnesses to testify that Morrison's men were responsible? Morrison's hired the best gunfighters in the territory. Maria Santos has 2 old cowboys and a handful of inexperienced ranch hands. But she'll also have a trained nurse to treat the wounded and document the evidence. Clara met Ethan's surprised gaze. "I'm going to help her defend that ranch." "Clara, these men are killers. This isn't a hospital ward where you can talk your way out of trouble. I've treated dozens of gunshot wounds in Chicago's worst neighborhoods. I know violence better than you think." Clara's voice carried steel now. "Besides, we need medical evidence to prove Morrison's men used military weapons in their fake raids." Ethan studied her determined expression. "You're serious about this?" "Morrison destroyed my life and murdered my uncle. He's not going to destroy Maria Santos, too. Then we'll need allies. I know some ranchers who've been fighting Morrison's expansion. Good men who'll stand with us if they see a real chance of stopping him. Clara began gathering her medical supplies. How many men can you bring? Maybe 8 or 10. Not enough to match Morrison's force, but enough to make a fight of it. We don't need to win a battle. We just need to survive long enough to gather evidence and get witnesses to safety. Clara packed her instruments carefully. Morrison's been succeeding because no one expects organized resistance. What happens when his fake raid meets real opposition? His men retreat or get captured. Either way, his cover story falls apart. Exactly. And I'll be there to document everything. Bullet trajectories, weapon types, evidence of premeditation. Clara shouldered her medical bag with newfound purpose. Morrison wants to eliminate witnesses. Instead, we're going to create them. Ethan struggled to his feet, testing his healing wound. This is dangerous, Clara. If we fail, Morrison will make sure we both disappear permanently. If we do nothing, he wins anyway. At least this way we fight back. You realize success means going up against David Whitmore and his family's influence. They have connections in Washington that could destroy us even if we expose Morrison. Clara looked around the cabin one final time. Her uncle's blood on the floor, her destroyed reputation, her stolen future. Everything Morrison had taken from her family. Let them try. I've already lost everything once. This time I'm not running. She opened the cabin door and stepped into the crisp mountain air. For the first time since leaving Chicago, Clara Bennett felt like herself again. Not a victim of circumstance, but a woman with purpose and skill ready to fight for justice. Ethan followed her outside, moving carefully, but steadily. When do we leave for the Santos Ranch? Tomorrow morning. We have 4 days to prepare Maria's defenses and gather our witnesses. Clara turned to face him. Morrison thinks he destroyed a helpless nurse. He's about to discover he created an enemy instead. The Santos Ranch sprawled across a fertile valley 20 miles south of Clara's uncle's cabin. Maria Santos met them at her front gate, with a Winchester rifle cradled in her arms and suspicion etched across her weathered face. Ethan Talbot, heard you were dead. Morrison's men came close. This is Clara Bennett. She's here to help. Maria's dark eyes studied Clara skeptically. The nurse from the newspapers? The one who seduced that rich boy in Chicago? The one who was framed by Morrison's business partner, Clara replied evenly. The same man who wants to steal your ranch. You believe Morrison's behind these Indian raids? Ethan dismounted and showed Maria his journal. Documented proof of 37 fake attacks over 18 months. Your ranch is next on his list. Maria examined the evidence while her 2 ranch hands watched from the porch. Both men looked to be past 60, with gnarled hands and bent backs from decades of hard work. If this is true, we don't stand a chance against professional gunfighters. We're not trying to win a war, Clara said. We need to survive long enough to gather evidence and create witnesses Morrison can't silence. Over the next 2 days, Clara transformed the ranch into a makeshift field hospital. She set up treatment stations in the main house, stocked medical supplies, and prepared bandages from torn bedsheets. Her systematic approach impressed even skeptical Maria. Ethan's allies began arriving on the second evening, 8 ranchers with weathered faces and determined expressions, men who had lost neighbors to Morrison's schemes and wanted justice. Clara treated their various ailments while they planned defensive positions. Old Carlos Rodriguez had arthritis that barely allowed him to hold a rifle. She mixed willow bark extract with honey to ease his joint pain. Young Tom Harrison suffered from recurring fever chills. Clara's careful diagnosis revealed early signs of malaria, treatable with proper medication. "Where did you learn to do this?" Maria asked, watching Clara expertly set a dislocated shoulder for another rancher. "Chicago's charity wards. Poor neighborhoods where gunshot wounds and knife fights were common." Clara adjusted the sling and checked circulation in the man's fingers. "Violence looks different in cities, but the injuries are the same. The newspapers made you sound like a scheming woman who destroyed that boy's reputation." David Whitmore destroyed himself. I was just convenient to blame. Clara began cleaning her instruments. Morrison needed me discredited before I could inherit my uncle's mining claims. Your Uncle Samuel was a good man. Helped my family during the drought 2 summers ago. Morrison murdered him for refusing to sell land worth more than this entire valley. Maria's expression hardened. Then we make Morrison pay for what he did. On the 3rd day, Clara established a medical practice for the local community. Word spread quickly that a skilled nurse was treating anyone regardless of ability to pay. Mexican families, struggling ranchers, even local Indian families brought their sick and injured to the Santos Ranch. Clara delivered Maria's neighbor's baby using techniques she had perfected in Chicago's overcrowded maternity wards. The successful birth created a bond of trust between Clara and the Mexican women who had initially viewed her with suspicion. She treated infected wounds with honey poultices and herbal antiseptics when proper medicines weren't available. Her innovative approaches often worked better than traditional frontier remedies. "You're building something here," Ethan observed, watching Clara examine a child's broken arm. "Building trust. Morrison's been spreading stories that I'm a dangerous woman who manipulates people." Clara set the bone with practiced efficiency. "Hard to maintain that lie when people see me saving their children." Each patient Clara treated became another witness to her true character. Each successful treatment created another family willing to testify against Morrison's propaganda campaign. On the 4th morning, smoke signals appeared on the eastern ridge. Morrison's fake Indian raid would begin before dawn the next day. Clara spent the evening making final preparations. She distributed medical supplies to defensive positions around the ranch buildings. Each location received bandages, antiseptic, and basic surgical instruments. "Remember, document everything," she told Ethan's allies. "Count the attackers. Note their weapons. Look for anything that proves these aren't real Indians." "What if we don't survive to tell anyone what we saw?" asked Carlos Rodriguez. "Some of us will survive. Morrison's men expect easy targets, not organized resistance." Clara checked her medical bag one final time. "They'll retreat when they realize they can't massacre everyone quickly and quietly." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked among the defensive positions, checking on the men who would risk their lives tomorrow. Several showed signs of pre-battle nerves that she recognized from treating soldiers in Chicago's veteran hospital. She mixed mild sedatives for those who needed rest and stimulants for others who would stand watch. Her calm confidence seemed to steady the nervous ranchers. "You're not what I expected," Maria said, finding Clara on the front porch before dawn. "What did you expect?" "A broken woman running from her mistakes. Instead, I see someone who's found her purpose." Maria chambered around in her Winchester. Morrison picked the wrong nurse to destroy. The eastern sky showed the first pale hints of sunrise. Somewhere in the darkness, Morrison's hired killers were moving into position for their fake raid. Clara positioned herself at the central aid station with clear sightlines to all defensive positions. Her medical instruments lay ready beside documentation materials to record evidence of Morrison's crimes. "Whatever happens today, we're taking back control of our lives," she told Ethan as he took position near the main gate. "Whatever happens, Morrison's reign of terror ends here." Clara watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt ready to fight back. The attack came at dawn, just as Ethan predicted. 12 riders approached the ranch buildings from multiple directions, their faces painted to look like hostile Indians. But Clara immediately spotted the deception. Real warriors wouldn't ride in such perfect formation or carry identical military-issue rifles. She began documenting everything in her journal: weapon types, attack patterns, tactical coordination that no raiding party would possess. The first gunshots shattered the morning quiet. Morrison's men expected to find sleeping ranchers and defenseless buildings. Instead, they met coordinated return fire from prepared positions. Tom Harrison took a bullet through his shoulder within the first minute. Clara ran to his position in a crouch, staying below the window line as shots peppered the walls around her. "It's not too bad," she told him, examining the wound. "Bullet went clean through." She bandaged him quickly and moved to the next injured defender. Carlos Rodriguez had taken shrapnel in his leg from a ricochet. Clara cleaned the wound and applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. The fake raiders regrouped after their initial assault failed. Clara watched them through a window crack and counted faces. Several were men she recognized from wanted posters in Denver newspapers. Professional killers, not desperate Indians. "They're pulling back to reassess," Ethan called from his position near the barn. Morrison's men had expected to overrun the ranch in minutes. The organized resistance clearly surprised them. Clara saw uncertainty in their movements as they realized their easy massacre had become a real fight. A rider approached under a white flag. Clara recognized him from newspaper photographs accompanying stories about territorial Indian conflicts. Jake Morrison, Samuel Morrison's brother and leader of his private army. "You're surrounded," Jake called out. "Surrender now, and we'll make it quick." "Come and take us," Maria replied from the main house. Jake's expression hardened. He wheeled his horse around and rejoined his men. The second assault came from all sides simultaneously. Morrison's gunmen had abandoned their Indian disguise and now fought with military precision. Clara realized they were former soldiers, probably veterans of recent territorial conflicts. She moved between wounded defenders, treating injuries while bullets flew overhead. A shot creased her temple, leaving a bleeding scratch, but she kept working. Her steady hands never wavered as she cleaned wounds and applied bandages. Young Tom Harrison proved himself despite his shoulder wound, picking off 2 attackers with careful rifle shots. Carlos Rodriguez held his position despite his injured leg, his decades of hunting experience making every shot count. The battle raged for 2 hours before the tide began to turn. Morrison's men had expected quick victory, not a prolonged firefight against determined opponents. Their ammunition ran low while the defenders had stockpiled supplies. Clara watched 3 riders break away from the attack and flee toward the eastern ridge. The remaining gunmen seemed to realize their mission had failed. "They're retreating," Ethan shouted. But Jake Morrison wasn't finished. He rode directly toward the main house, clearly intending to kill Maria Santos before escaping. Clara saw him coming and made a split-second decision. She stepped into the open doorway and aimed her uncle's old revolver at the charging horseman. Clara had never shot at another human being, but her hand remained steady. The bullet caught Jake Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. His horse continued running while he hit the ground hard and lay still. The remaining attackers saw their leader fall and immediately began withdrawing. Within minutes, the ranch fell silent except for the moans of wounded men on both sides. Clara ran to check on Jake Morrison. He was unconscious but breathing. The bullet had shattered his collarbone without hitting major arteries. She began treating his wound, despite knowing he had come here to kill her friends. "Why are you helping him?" Maria asked. "Because I'm a nurse. I don't choose who lives or dies based on what side they're fighting for." Clara's medical treatment kept Jake Morrison alive to face justice. More importantly, it kept him alive to testify about his brother's criminal operation. As Clara worked, riders appeared on the horizon, too many to be more of Morrison's men. Ethan grabbed his rifle until he recognized the lead rider. "Federal Marshals," he called out. "Real ones this time." Marshal William Hayes dismounted and surveyed the battlefield. His experienced eyes immediately noted the military weapons scattered around the ranch yard and the professional coordination of the attack. "Miss Bennett, I presume? We've been looking for you." Clara looked up from bandaging Jake Morrison's shoulder. "Are you here to arrest me?" "On the contrary. We're here because of evidence you helped gather about Samuel Morrison's criminal enterprise." Hayes examined one of the abandoned rifles. Military-issue Springfield rifles, stolen from the Denver Armory 6 months ago. "Morrison's been selling weapons to both sides of territorial conflicts," Ethan explained, "creating violence so he can profit from the aftermath." Hayes nodded grimly. "We've been investigating Morrison's operation for months. Your documentation provided the final pieces we needed." Clara finished treating Jake Morrison's wound and stood to face the marshal. "What about the charges against me in Chicago?" Federal investigation revealed David Whitmore's embezzlement scheme. He's been using stolen charity funds to finance Morrison's land purchases. Hayes pulled out a telegram from his saddlebags. Chicago Medical Board has officially reinstated your license and cleared your record. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. After months of disgrace and exile, her name was finally clear. There's more, Hayes continued. Morrison's been spreading false stories about you to prevent locals from trusting your potential testimony. That conspiracy charge alone will put him in federal prison for 20 years. Clara looked around at the ranch she had helped defend. Wounded men were being treated by friends and neighbors. Maria Santos embraced her children, who had hidden in the root cellar during the battle. The community had stood together against Morrison's tyranny and won. But Clara knew the real victory wasn't just defeating Morrison's hired killers. She had found her purpose again and proven her worth to herself and others. Federal marshals arrested Samuel Morrison at his Denver headquarters 3 days after the failed raid. Jake Morrison's testimony from his hospital bed provided detailed evidence of the entire criminal conspiracy. David Whitmore was taken into custody simultaneously at his family's Chicago mansion. Clara spent the week following the battle treating wounded defenders and documenting evidence for the federal investigation. Her detailed medical reports proved Morrison's men had used military weapons and coordinated tactics impossible for any genuine Indian raiding party. Marshal Hayes returned to the Santos Ranch with official documentation clearing Clara's name. The Chicago Medical Board had not only reinstated her license but issued a formal apology acknowledging the false accusations against her. The Whitmore family has agreed to pay substantial compensation for the damage to your reputation, Hayes explained. They're trying to distance themselves from David's criminal activities. Clara folded the official papers and placed them in her medical bag. The vindication felt surreal after months of believing her nursing career was permanently destroyed. What happens to Morrison's stolen land claims? Returned to the rightful owners or their heirs? Your uncle's mining claims are legally yours now. The silver deposits are worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Clara looked across the valley, where she had found her purpose again. Financial security was important, but it wasn't what mattered most anymore. Ethan approached from the barn where he had been tending his horse. His gunshot wound had healed cleanly under Clara's care, leaving only a thin scar as evidence of their first meeting. Marshal Hayes says you're officially a free woman. Free and vindicated. My nursing license is restored and my reputation cleared. So you'll be returning to Chicago? Clara studied his face, searching for the answer she hoped to find. Do you want me to return to Chicago? I want you to stay here with me. Build something together that neither of us could create alone. Clara had spent months believing her life was ruined beyond repair. Now she saw possibilities stretching ahead like the vast Colorado landscape surrounding them. The territorial government has offered me a position as chief medical officer for the entire region, she said, organizing health care for mining camps, ranches, and settlements throughout the territory. That sounds like exactly the kind of challenge you'd love. It would mean traveling extensively, setting up clinics in remote areas, training local people in basic medical care. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. My ranch is centrally located. It could serve as headquarters for your medical operations. Clara smiled at his carefully neutral tone. Are you offering me a business partnership or something more personal? I'm offering you everything I have, my ranch, my name, my future. If you'll have them. Clara had learned not to trust easy promises after David Whitmore's manipulative courtship in Chicago. But Ethan had proven his character through actions, not words. He had defended her reputation, fought beside her, and treated her as an equal partner. Yes, she said simply. They married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that brought together the diverse community Clara had served during her recovery. Mexican families, struggling ranchers, local Indian bands, and successful cattlemen all celebrated alongside federal marshals and territorial officials. Clara wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully preserved through her journey from Chicago to Colorado. Ethan's gift was a fully equipped medical wagon that would allow her to bring professional health care to the most remote settlements in the territory. Maria Santos served as Clara's maid of honor while her husband performed the marriage ceremony in Spanish and English. The celebration continued late into the evening with music, dancing, and shared stories from families Clara had helped. 6 months after their wedding, Clara established the first integrated medical training school west of the Mississippi River. She recruited students regardless of race or background, focusing on aptitude and dedication rather than social connections. Her innovative teaching methods combined traditional medical knowledge with frontier practicality. Students learned to treat injuries with available materials, recognize diseases common in mining camps, and establish sanitary conditions in primitive settlements. The school's reputation attracted attention from medical colleges in the East. Clara began receiving correspondence from doctors requesting copies of her frontier medical manual and invitations to lecture at established institutions. But she remained committed to serving Colorado Territory's growing population. Her traveling clinics reduced infant mortality rates, controlled disease outbreaks, and provided medical care to communities that had never seen a trained healthcare professional. Ethan expanded his cattle operation to support Clara's medical work financially. Their ranch became a model of integrated operations where medical training, cattle ranching, and community development worked together successfully. 2 years after Morrison's conviction, Clara received a letter from a young woman in Philadelphia. Sarah Williams had read newspaper accounts of Clara's story and wanted to study nursing despite her family's opposition to the idea. Clara wrote back immediately, inviting Sarah to Colorado for medical training. Within months, applications arrived from across the country. Young women who had been inspired by Clara's transformation from disgraced exile to respected medical pioneer. The medical school expanded rapidly. Clara trained dozens of nurses who carried modern healthcare to frontier communities throughout the Western Territories. Her students established clinics from Montana to Arizona, following Clara's model of serving all people regardless of background or circumstances. 5 years after arriving in Colorado as a broken refugee, Clara delivered her first child in the same cabin where she had once contemplated ending her life. Dr. Clara Talbot had become one of the most respected medical professionals in the American West. She named her daughter Hope, a reminder that even the darkest circumstances could transform into unexpected blessings. Ethan carved a plaque for the cabin door, marking it as the birthplace of both their daughter and Clara's redemption. The woman who had once been destroyed by lies and prejudice had built a legacy of healing and hope that would endure for generations. Clara Bennett Talbot had not merely survived her trials. She had transformed them into the foundation for a life of service and love beyond anything she had imagined possible.